Abraham Lincoln, a name that echoes through the annals of American history, was a remarkable lawyer, politician, and statesman. Born on February 12, 1809, he went on to become the 16th President of the United States, serving from 1861 until his tragic assassination in 1865. As president, Lincoln steered the nation through the American Civil War, fighting to preserve the United States as a constitutional union. His efforts eventually led to the abolition of slavery, the strengthening of the federal government, and the modernization of the U.S. economy. Lincoln's journey began in a humble log cabin in Kentucky, where he was born into poverty. Raised on the frontier, primarily in Indiana, he pursued education through sheer determination and self-learning. He eventually became a lawyer, Whig Party leader, Illinois state legislator, and U.S. congressman from Illinois. In 1849, Lincoln temporarily stepped back from politics to focus on his thriving law practice in central Illinois. However, the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act, which opened territories to slavery, ignited Lincoln's political ambitions once more. As a leader of the newly formed Republican Party, he gained national prominence during the 1858 Senate campaign debates against Stephen A. Douglas. Lincoln's run for presidency in 1860 saw him secure a sweeping victory in the North. Yet his election was perceived as a threat to slavery by pro-slavery elements in the South, leading to Southern states seceding from the Union. Consequently, the Confederate States of America seized federal military bases in the South, and shortly after Lincoln's inauguration, the Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter, a U.S. fort in South Carolina. This marked the beginning of the Civil War, as Lincoln mobilized forces to suppress the rebellion and restore the Union. As a moderate Republican, Lincoln had to skillfully navigate a complex political landscape with factions from both Democratic and Republican parties. His allies, the War Democrats and Radical Republicans, called for harsh treatment of the Southern Confederates, while anti-war Democrats, known as Copperheads, despised Lincoln. Meanwhile, pro-Confederate elements plotted his assassination. Lincoln managed these factions by exploiting their mutual enmity, distributing political patronage, and appealing to the American people. His Gettysburg Address emerged as one of the most influential statements of American national purpose. Lincoln's strategic supervision of the war effort included selecting generals and implementing a naval blockade of the South's trade. He suspended habeas corpus in Maryland and other regions, and averted British intervention by defusing the Trent Affair. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared slaves in the states in rebellion to be free and directed the Army and Navy to maintain their freedom. Lincoln also pressured border states to outlaw slavery and promoted the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which, upon ratification, abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. Lincoln's skillful management of his re-election campaign led to his victory. He sought to heal the war-torn nation through reconciliation. However, on April 14, 1865, just 5 days after the war's end at Appomattox, Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., with his wife, Mary. Tragically, Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth fatally shot Lincoln that night. Today, Lincoln is remembered as a martyr and national hero for his wartime leadership and efforts to preserve the Union and abolish slavery. Consistently ranked as the greatest president in American history, Lincoln's legacy continues to inspire and shape the nation. Family and childhood, a glimpse into Lincoln's early life. Abraham Lincoln, born on February 12, 1809, was the second child of Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln. The family lived in a modest log cabin near Hodgenville, Kentucky. Lincoln's ancestry traced back to Samuel Lincoln, an Englishman who migrated to Massachusetts in 1638. His family later moved westward through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Abraham's paternal grandfather, Captain Abraham Lincoln, was killed in an Indian raid in 1786. His father, Thomas, witnessed the attack at the age of 8. Thomas eventually settled in Hardin County, Kentucky, after working various jobs in Kentucky and Tennessee. Lincoln's mother, Nancy, is believed to have been the daughter of Lucy Hanks. In 1816, the Lincoln family moved to Indiana, a free, non-slaveholding territory, to escape land title issues and the influence of slavery. They settled in Hurricane Township, Prairie County, Indiana, where Thomas worked as a farmer, cabinet maker, and carpenter. He and Nancy were members of a separate Baptist church which opposed alcohol, dancing, and slavery. Abraham's mother, Nancy, passed away in 1818 from milk sickness, leaving 11-year-old Sarah in charge of the household. 10 years later, Sarah also died, leaving Abraham devastated. In 1819, Thomas married Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow with 3 children. Abraham grew close to his stepmother and referred to her as mother. Young Abraham was known for his love of reading and aversion to physical labor. Despite his family's disapproval, he pursued self-education, attending schools sporadically due to farm chores. His reading included the King James Bible, Aesop's Fables, The Pilgrim's Progress, Robinson Crusoe, and the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. As a teenager, Lincoln took responsibility for household chores, giving his earnings to his father until he turned 21. He was tall, strong, and athletic, excelling in wrestling and gaining a reputation for his strength and audacity. In 1830, the Lincoln family moved to Illinois, a free state. Soon after, Abraham moved to New Salem, Illinois, where he lived for 6 years. It was here that he first encountered slavery during a flatboat trip to New Orleans. Lincoln's personal life included relationships with Anne Rutledge, Mary Owens, and finally Mary Todd, whom he married in 1842. They had 4 sons, only one of whom survived to adulthood. The deaths of their children had profound effects on both Abraham and Mary, with Lincoln experiencing bouts of depression and Mary struggling with mental health issues later in life. Together, they weathered the challenges of family life, while Abraham pursued his political ambitions, eventually leading him to the presidency and a lasting legacy as one of America's greatest leaders. Early career and militia service. Abraham Lincoln began his career working at a general store in New Salem, Illinois, during 1831 and 1832. In 1832, he ran for the Illinois House of Representatives, but paused his campaign to serve as a captain in the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War. After his military service, Lincoln initially planned to become a blacksmith, but instead partnered with William Berry to purchase a general store on credit. The store eventually became a tavern, with Lincoln and Berry acquiring bartending licenses. However, the business struggled, and Lincoln eventually sold his share. During his first campaign speech after returning from the Black Hawk War, Lincoln displayed his physical prowess by tossing an assailant, attacking one of his supporters. Although he drew crowds as a storyteller, Lincoln lacked formal education, powerful friends, and money, which contributed to his loss in the election. He finished 8th out of 13 candidates, but won 277 of the 300 votes cast in the New Salem precinct. After the election, Lincoln served as New Salem's postmaster and later as a county surveyor. His passion for reading continued, and he decided to become a lawyer. Instead of following the customary practice of studying under an established attorney, Lincoln borrowed legal texts from attorneys John Todd Stewart and Thomas Drummond and studied law independently. This self-guided approach to his legal education would later serve him well as he continued to pursue a career in law and politics. Illinois State Legislature, 1834-1842. Abraham Lincoln successfully campaigned for the Illinois House of Representatives in 1834 as a Whig candidate, winning against a strong Whig opponent. He went on to serve 4 terms in the Illinois House, representing Sangamon County. During this time, Lincoln advocated for the construction of the Illinois and Michigan Canal, and even served as a canal commissioner. While in the state legislature, Lincoln voted to expand suffrage to all white males, not just landowners. He adopted a free soil stance, opposing both slavery and abolition. In 1837, he stated that slavery was founded on injustice and bad policy, but believed that promoting abolition doctrines would only exacerbate its evils. Lincoln supported the American Colonization Society, which aimed to abolish slavery while resettling freed slaves in Liberia. In 1836, Lincoln was admitted to the Illinois bar and subsequently moved to Springfield to practice law under John T. Stewart, who was Mary Todd's cousin. He became known for his skillful cross-examinations and closing arguments. Lincoln partnered with Stephen T. Logan for several years before beginning his practice with William Herndon in 1844, who was described as a studious young man. U.S. House of Representatives, 1847-1849. Abraham Lincoln identified as an old line Whig, a disciple of Henry Clay. The Whig Party favored economic modernization in banking, tariffs for internal improvements, railroads, and urbanization. In 1843, Lincoln sought the Whig nomination for Illinois' 7th district seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, but was defeated by John J. Hardin. In 1846, Lincoln won the nomination and was elected to the U.S. House. As the only Whig in the Illinois delegation, Lincoln participated in almost all votes and made speeches that supported the party line. He was assigned to the Committee on Post Office and Post Roads and the Committee on Expenditures in the War Department. Lincoln collaborated with Joshua R. Giddings on a bill to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia, but he dropped the bill when it failed to gain Whig support. On foreign and military policy, Lincoln opposed the Mexican-American War and President James K. Polk's desire for military glory. He supported the Wilmot Proviso, a failed proposal to ban slavery in any U.S. territory won from Mexico. Lincoln questioned the validity of the war's beginnings by introducing his spot resolutions, which demanded that Polk show Congress the exact spot where American blood had been shed on American soil. The resolution was ignored and cost Lincoln political support in his district. Having pledged to serve only one term in the House, Lincoln supported General Zachary Taylor for the Whig nomination in the 1848 presidential election. After Taylor's victory, Lincoln unsuccessfully hoped to be appointed Commissioner of the General Land Office. The administration offered him a position as Secretary or Governor of the Oregon Territory, but Lincoln declined as it would have disrupted his legal and political career in Illinois and he resumed his law practice. Prairie lawyer. As a Prairie lawyer in Springfield, Abraham Lincoln handled a diverse range of cases, appearing in county seats for 10 consecutive weeks twice a year for 16 years. He dealt with transportation cases during the nation's western expansion, initially favoring riverboat interests, but ultimately representing whoever hired him. Lincoln represented a bridge company in a landmark case, heard v. Rock Island Bridge Company, involving a canal boat that sank after hitting a bridge. In 1849, Lincoln received a patent for a flotation device for moving boats in shallow water, making him the only president to hold a patent. Lincoln appeared before the Illinois Supreme Court in 175 cases, with a favorable outcome in 31 of the 51 cases where he was sole counsel. From 1853 to 1860, one of his largest clients was the Illinois Central Railroad. His legal reputation earned him the nickname Honest Abe. In an 1858 criminal trial, Lincoln successfully defended William Duff Armstrong, who was on trial for murder. Lincoln used a farmer's almanac to challenge the credibility of an eyewitness, leading to Armstrong's acquittal. In 1859, Lincoln elevated his profile with the defense of Simeon Quinn Peachy Harrison in a murder case. He successfully argued for the inclusion of a dying declaration as admissible evidence, resulting in Harrison's acquittal. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, proposed by Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas, allowed the electorate of each territory to decide the status of slavery. This alarmed many Northerners who were concerned about the potential spread of slavery. The Whig Party was irreparably split by the act, and Lincoln later wrote, "I think I am a Whig, but others say there are no Whigs, and that I am an abolitionist." The Republican Party was formed as a Northern party dedicated to anti-slavery, drawing from the anti-slavery wing of the Whig Party and combining free soil, liberty, and anti-slavery Democratic Party members. In 1854, Lincoln was elected to the Illinois legislature but declined to take his seat. Lincoln sought election to the United States Senate in the aftermath of the strong opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He led in the first 6 rounds of voting but was unable to obtain a majority. Lincoln instructed his backers to vote for Lyman Trumbull, an anti-slavery Democrat, to combine and defeat the mainstream Democratic candidate. Lincoln joined the Republicans and attended the Bloomington Convention, which formally established the Illinois Republican Party. The convention platform endorsed Congress's right to regulate slavery in the territories and backed the admission of Kansas as a free state. Lincoln gave the final speech of the convention supporting the party platform and called for the preservation of the Union. In 1858, Lincoln hoped to defeat Senator Douglas, who was up for re-election. Lincoln received the Republican nomination for the Senate race, which featured 7 debates between Lincoln and Douglas, known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Though the Republican legislative candidates won more popular votes, the Democrats won more seats, and the legislature re-elected Douglas. However, Lincoln's articulation of the issues gave him a national political presence. In the 1860 presidential election, Lincoln won the Republican nomination and was elected the 16th president, receiving support entirely from the North and West. He was the first Republican president, and his victory was an omen of the impending Civil War. The presidency of Abraham Lincoln, 1861-1865, began with his inauguration on March 4, 1861. The South was outraged by his election, leading to secessionist movements in multiple states. South Carolina adopted an ordinance of secession in December 1860, followed by 6 other states. These states declared themselves the Confederate States of America and chose Jefferson Davis as their provisional president. Lincoln and the Republicans rejected the Crittenden Compromise, which would have allowed slavery to continue where it already existed. Lincoln also tacitly supported the Corwin Amendment, which aimed to protect slavery in states where it existed, but ultimately failed to pass. In February 1861, Lincoln traveled east with an unprecedented level of security due to secessionist plots. During his inaugural address, he assured the South that he had no intention of abolishing slavery in the southern states, but emphasized his plans to ban the expansion of slavery as the source of conflict between the North and the South. As efforts to reach a legislative compromise failed, Lincoln and the Republican leadership agreed that the dismantling of the Union could not be tolerated. In his second inaugural address, Lincoln reflected on the situation, saying both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish, and the war came. The American Civil War began when Confederate forces fired on Union troops at Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, on April 12, 1861. President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteer troops to help preserve the Union. As a result, states were forced to choose sides, with Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas seceding from the Union. However, secession sentiment in Missouri, Maryland, and Kentucky did not prevail. Lincoln took executive control of the war and shaped the Union military strategy. He expanded his war powers, imposed a blockade on Confederate ports, disbursed funds before appropriation by Congress, suspended habeas corpus, and arrested and imprisoned suspected Confederate sympathizers. He worked closely with various generals, such as George B. McClellan, Henry Halleck, and Winfield Scott, and relied on his cabinet for advice. Throughout the war, Lincoln had to deal with several challenges, such as bipartisan support for the war effort, keeping border slave states loyal to the Union, and preventing the war from becoming an international conflict. The 1862 midterm elections saw the Republicans suffer losses, but Lincoln remained focused on his military strategy. Some of his decisions, like the Emancipation Proclamation, had significant political implications. Despite several setbacks and changes in command, Union forces began to make progress in the war. In 1863, General Meade defeated Confederate General Lee in the Gettysburg campaign, while General Grant captured Vicksburg and gained control of the Mississippi River. These victories helped to turn the tide in favor of the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War, marking a shift in the focus of the conflict. While the federal government's power to end slavery was limited by the Constitution, Lincoln believed that preventing the expansion of slavery into new territories would eventually lead to its demise. Despite initial resistance and concerns about upsetting loyal border states, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, which declared that slaves in states still in rebellion would be free. The Emancipation Proclamation also allowed for the enlistment of freed slaves in the Union Army, which bolstered its forces and ultimately helped contribute to the Union's victory. Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863, further emphasized the importance of the principles of liberty and equality for all. General Ulysses, Grant's military successes and Lincoln's support led to Grant's promotion to Supreme Commander. In 1864, Grant led the Overland Campaign, which inflicted heavy losses on both sides. Lincoln authorized Grant to target Confederate infrastructure, ultimately weakening the South's fighting ability. As Grant's forces continued to weaken Lee's Confederate forces, peace discussions began, but Lincoln refused to negotiate with the Confederacy as a co-equal. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, officially ending the war. In 1864, Lincoln ran for re-election, uniting various Republican factions and war Democrats like Edwin M. Stanton and Andrew Johnson. To broaden his coalition, Lincoln ran under the label of the new Union Party. While Grant's bloody stalemates initially hurt Lincoln's re-election prospects, the capture of Atlanta by Sherman and Mobile by David Farragut boosted his chances. The Democratic Party was deeply split, while the National Union Party remained united in support of Lincoln. Lincoln won the election, carrying all but 3 states. In his second inaugural address, Lincoln emphasized the need for unity, healing, and a lasting peace. During Reconstruction, he aimed to reunite the nation and reintegrate the southern states without alienating them. He faced opposition from radical Republicans who considered his policies too lenient. In response, he appointed individuals from both moderate and radical factions to various positions. Lincoln pushed for the passage of a constitutional amendment to outlaw slavery, which ultimately became the 13th Amendment. He signed the Freedmen's Bureau Bill, which set up a temporary federal agency to address the immediate needs of former slaves. However, historians are uncertain about how Reconstruction would have proceeded had Lincoln lived. Some argue that he would have followed a policy similar to Johnson's, while others believe he would have eventually come to embrace positions first advanced by abolitionists and radical Republicans. Native Americans. Lincoln's experience with Native Americans began early when his grandfather was killed in front of the family. He later served as a captain in the state militia during the Black Hawk War, but did not see combat. As president, his policy toward Indians was based on politics, using appointments to the Indian Bureau as a reward to supporters from Minnesota and Wisconsin. His administration faced difficulties protecting Western settlers, railroads, and telegraphs from Indian attacks. When the Sioux or Dakota Uprising occurred in Minnesota in 1862, Lincoln initially ordered thousands of Confederate prisoners of war sent by railroad to suppress the uprising, but later revoked the policy. General John Pope was sent to Minnesota as commander of the new Department of the Northwest during the hostilities. Lincoln declined offers from the Fond du Lac Band of Chippewa and Mille Lacs Band chief to fight against the Sioux using indigenous rules of warfare. Minnesota Congressman Henry H. Sibley served under General Pope and was instrumental in defeating Little Crow's forces at the Battle of Wood Lake. After the Mdewakanton force surrendered, Sibley ordered a military commission to review the actions of the captured to try those who committed war crimes. Lincoln eventually commuted the sentences of 263 of the convicted men, while 38 were executed in the largest mass hanging in U.S. history. Some questions remain unanswered regarding 3 of the executions. Whig theory of a presidency. Lincoln adhered to the Whig theory of a presidency focused on executing laws while deferring to Congress's responsibility for legislating. He vetoed only 4 bills, including the Wade-Davis bill with its harsh Reconstruction program. The 1862 Homestead Act, the 1862 Morrill Land Grant Colleges Act, and the Pacific Railway Acts of 1862 and 1864 were all passed during his administration. Lincoln utilized the strengths of his opponents in the selection and use of his cabinet, commenting that he had chosen the strongest men from his party. The cabinet included figures like William H. Seward, Salmon P. Chase, Simon Cameron, and Edwin M. Stanton, among others. Under Lincoln's administration, the federal government's economic influence expanded. The National Banking Act created the system of national banks, and the U.S. issued paper currency for the first time. In 1862, Congress created the Department of Agriculture. Lincoln is also largely responsible for the Thanksgiving holiday, declaring the final Thursday in November to be a day of Thanksgiving in 1863. In 1864, he approved the Yosemite Grant enacted by Congress, providing federal protection for the area now known as Yosemite National Park. Supreme Court appointments. Lincoln appointed 5 justices to the Supreme Court, including Noah Haynes, Swain, Samuel Freeman Miller, David Davis, Stephen Johnson Field, and Salmon Portland Chase as Chief Justice. These appointments reflected a range of political affiliations and geographic backgrounds. Foreign policy. Lincoln named his main political rival William H. Seward as Secretary of State, who played a key role in keeping Britain and France from supporting the Confederacy during the Civil War. Lincoln himself closely monitored the handling of the Trent Affair in 1861 to prevent escalation into a war with Britain. Assassination. John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate spy, was responsible for the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. After attending a speech where Lincoln promoted voting rights for blacks, Booth plotted to assassinate the president. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln and his wife attended the play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theatre. Booth entered the back of Lincoln's theatre box and shot him in the back of the head, mortally wounding him. Major Henry Rathbone, Lincoln's guest, briefly grappled with Booth before Booth stabbed him and escaped. Lincoln was attended by 3 doctors and taken to Peterson House, where he remained in a coma for 8 hours before dying at 7:22 a.m. on April 15. Vice President Andrew Johnson was sworn in as president later that day. Booth was eventually tracked to a farm in Virginia and mortally shot by Sergeant Boston Corbett on April 26. Funeral and burial. President Lincoln's body lay in state in the White House's East Room and then in the Capitol Rotunda from April 19 to April 21. His body, along with his son Willis, was transported on a funeral train called the Lincoln Special that followed a circuitous route from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois. Hundreds of thousands of people attended memorial events held in many cities, while others gathered along the tracks to mourn. Lincoln's body was buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois, and now lies within the Lincoln Tomb. Religious and philosophical beliefs. Abraham Lincoln was a religious skeptic in his youth, but he was deeply familiar with the Bible and often quoted it. He was private about his position on organized religion and respected the beliefs of others, never making a clear profession of Christian beliefs. However, his most famous speeches often contained direct allusions to providence and quotes from Scripture. In the 1840s, Lincoln subscribed to the doctrine of necessity, which posited that the human mind was controlled by a higher power. The death of his son, Edward, in 1850 led him to more frequently express a dependence on God. Although he never joined a church, he attended First Presbyterian Church with his wife from 1852 onwards. Throughout his life, Lincoln's belief in an all-powerful God that shaped events evolved, and by 1865, he was expressing this belief in major speeches. The death of his son, Willie, in 1862, and the severity of the Civil War prompted him to look toward religion for solace and seek explanations for events. Lincoln's second inaugural address, considered by some as the greatest in American history, reflects his spirituality and belief that the cause, purpose, and result of the war were God's will. His use of religious imagery and language toward the end of his life could have reflected his personal beliefs or been a means to reach his predominantly evangelical Protestant audiences. On the day he was assassinated, Lincoln reportedly expressed a desire to visit the Holy Land. Legacy. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is extensive and complex, reflecting his role as a champion of human liberty, a symbol of American values, and a skilled statesman who navigated the country through one of its most challenging periods. Lincoln's redefinition of Republican values, emphasizing freedom and equality for all, is an important part of his legacy. He focused on the moral basis of republicanism and the importance of upholding the Constitution and preserving the Republic. Lincoln's policies and beliefs, such as his support for business, infrastructure improvements, and opposition to the spread of slavery, have been both praised and criticized over time. The successful reunification of the states following the Civil War had lasting consequences for how people viewed the country. Lincoln's efforts during his presidency contributed to the eventual dominance of the singular usage of the term the United States by the end of the 19th century. Lincoln's historical reputation has been generally positive, with many scholars and public opinion surveys ranking him among the top presidents in U.S. history. However, his legacy has also been challenged and debated, particularly with respect to his views on race and the extent to which he deserves the title of the Great Emancipator. In the decades following his assassination, Lincoln became a national martyr and was viewed by many as a symbol of American values and aspirations. His image has evolved over time, reflecting changes in American society and politics. In the 20th and 21st centuries, political figures from various backgrounds have admired and invoked his legacy for different reasons. Memorials to Lincoln can be found throughout the United States and around the world. His likeness appears on U.S. currency and postage stamps, and numerous monuments, including the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., honor his life and achievements. His legacy continues to be a source of inspiration and debate, reflecting his enduring impact on American history and culture.